Customer is always right. Customers might lead you astray. I think the customer is always right if he is the right customer to start with. So therefore, we need to qualify. And then the perspective, we're back to the CIO and the customer experience in that regard. The perspective of the customer would be experience, the happy experience that we want him from. Who is the customer to the CIO? Is it the end customer that receives the service or product of the organization, or is it the business department that is trying to understand this customer or the customer-facing people? And if you will, the CIO have a big problem because he has an aggregate customer, a cascade of customers in order to understand the end customer in that regard. So there is a lot of struggle on how to understand how to interface with the customer. The thread between you and your customer is really the information bridge or the thread between both sides. And this is an area of discontent usually in that regard. I think customer experience is your, if you cannot escalate or grow the customer experience in the positive direction, your brand will suffer extremely, because that's the brand promise reflected only in the customer experience, and therefore it is of strategic and prime importance in that regard.
I really like something you said about having the right customer in the first place. I think that may be one of the first questions to ask when you're trying to define who your customer
Definitely.
is. Yeah. Okay, it's time now to put you all to work. And so I would like to open up the floor for any questions. Now, we're currently talking about creating the customer experience, sustainable customer experience, but we don't need to limit it to that topic. If you have a question in any other area that you'd like to kick it off with, by all means. So does anyone in the audience have a question they'd like to start with? Could I ask you to raise your hand? All right, we'll bring you a microphone. Just ask us who you'd like to address your question to, or if you would like all of the panel to respond. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My question is, frankly, it is for the entire panel, and I'm going to talk about the CIO, the first topic that you started with. With the trend changing that it's no more technology-oriented, it's all business-oriented. And what do you think CIO's role will be in the future? Because now if there is a CEO, and there was a need when their technology was at the top, but today it's all about business need. It is service-oriented, and especially with the cloud emerging technologies coming up fast in the market, what is the role of a CIO will be in the future? Will they be there, or it will be vanished?
It's a very good question. Do you have anyone specifically you'd like to respond, or should I
leave it to the panel? Anyone can answer.
Okay, I'll start with Paul, please.
Well, I suppose, I mean, the short answer is yes, but, we're running a business. I'm a business person. Phil talked about that this morning. If you look at the asset register on a company, first of all, I'd think about its people and its people assets, and then I'd look at the products and services and the technology on its asset register. A CEO in my mind has two things. One is manage that infrastructure pristinely, perfectly, reduce costs, deliver customer experience, do all that stuff. But that's the stuff we don't brag about, right? That's just what we do. And that's what you have to do as a CIO, and get over it, as it were, almost. What we also then need to become, in my opinion, to the talks this morning, is an innovation partner. I put the person on the board that is helping the whole team, not just on our own, the whole team come up with new ideas, taking the business forward, coming up with new ideas, creating the sandbox for marketing to move forward, creating new partnerships and so on. So I don't think the role of this job is dead. CIO will be a number of things, but it's business people with technology skills, with an innovative slant, which are going to be the gold dust. And the talent we need to develop are you know, for now, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, are the people that can work in that type of environment. So I don't see this industry as dead at all.
Do any of the other panelists want to add something to that? Well,
Sure, I like the question, and the gentleman said the train is changing, if I heard right. And if the CIO role will go away. I think the CIO role is not going to go away, but it's going to change dramatically, just like the train is changing. So I'm going to give an example, an example of a real story and an analogy at the same time. We're working with a municipality in Australia with their smarter transportation as far as in the Smarter Planet initiative. And we manage their efficiency in the trains. And this is a brilliant municipality because the train wheels touch the tracks all the time. Traditionally, there's a project that inspects the tracks separately. But we came to a realization, hey, the train is touching the track already. Why don't we have sensors on the wheels of the train to inspect the tracks as it goes forward? And it's been a great success. That's not an IBM initiative, it's that municipalities' initiatives. So this is a real example. The analogy is the CIO's job is changing in a way that wheel is inspecting the track on the move.
For me, I think the death of the CIO has been announced over the last 25 years, and some of us are still here, so it must be okay so far. I think, for me, Gartner talked about something called an entrepreneurial CIO. CIOs will no longer be seen useful by the business if that's how they make themselves. It's up to a CIO to reinvent themselves, to make themselves needy for a business, to make themselves critical to a business. If they wait for the business to evaluate them, the business will disappear, will move on, and their role will disappear. I think you have to make whatever your business needs. You come from an old legacy organization, you'll have a very technology-oriented job. If you come from a very market-oriented organization, you'll have a very entrepreneurial marketing-type role. It really is the CIO to find what they want. If they just sit there and wait for it to happen, they will suddenly disappear. And many organizations in Europe in particular find the CIO is being supplanted by the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, and then they are supplanted by losing their board position or working, say, for a finance or a shared services person. Largely, when I look at that, that's down to actually they themselves did not make out the story or the remit for why they should stay and do their role. The CIO has their own destiny in their own hand.
Sad, do you have anything to add?
No, the safest way is to agree with everybody. So.
Well, while we're
It's
on
less
this
fun,
topic, and that was an excellent question, by the way, thank you. While we're on this topic, Ian Ryder, the CEO for the BCS, really wanted me to ask this question. And I told him only if we had time, but I think it's relevant actually right now since we're talking about the role of the CIO. Now, I'm not sure if he wanted me to ask it because he's the CEO and he has some decisions to make or not. However, here goes. Within the next 2 years, who do you believe will be more influential in the organization? The CIO, the CMO, or the CDO?
What's the CDO?
It's something that Gartner has just coined a phrase of this Chief Digital Officer.
Consultants.
Consultants. So none of the above.
No, I'm saying this is consultant jargon. That's how sell you more things. So.
Okay, so let's start with you, Saad. What do you think?
I think if all are not important, this organization is zilch. There is no hierarchy of importance. Okay, there is specialization of jobs. Any healthy organization with a healthy culture, none will be, should be more important than the other. If it's by power, then the CEO should be the most powerful. But I think the issue is for a healthy organization. No, I think this chief digital officer is a term that I don't understand. I don't agree, and I think we are used to people like Gartner cranking out terminologies that lead us astray, play with for 10 years, and then they come up with something else to sell their reports. It's a nice ploy, yani. but it doesn't have any reality. I mean, what's chief digital officer? I believe in chief information officer. That's what I believe in.
So I'm really glad at this point that I don't work for Gardner. So Ian, I'm not sure if that actually helps you make a decision, but I think what I heard Sad say is that you have to keep them all, really. There you go.
Only fire the CDO.
Do any of the other panelists want to add something? Any insights in that area? Okay, any question from the audience, please? Oh, there are a few. So,
can you hear me properly? Right, good afternoon, and I'd like to thank Ms. Taylor and the panel. I'd like to thank BCS. It's a great opportunity to listen to you and learn from you and to meet with the very promising youth I find around. I come from a background of educational management. We manage schools, we start them up. And I'd like to take this opportunity to learn about your point of view regarding an issue which is really related to the point that you started with, sustainable customer experience. In our area, we find out very frequently that the customer, as one of the gentlemen mentioned, I believe Paul, sometimes the customer, but the difference between what the customer wants and what we think the customer needs are different. And as educators sometimes agree on deciding on curricula or other matters or teaching methodologies or resourcing or even policies, sometimes you would find that the community that schools are serving are not necessarily happy with what may provide a better future for their children. So there is some conflict between the child's and the parent's happiness sometimes and the requirements of society in future for work and for people who are experts, people who can produce. Therefore, sometimes we find some good schools not sustaining customer experience for long enough. So they may be successful in academically or in teaching these children, but they cannot sustain the customer to long enough for them to survive. And on the other hand, we find some schools that stress other areas that really are probably fun-based. Of course, students should learn through fun, but teaching less than the first schools that I mentioned sustain more. Now, I would like to learn a little bit about this, if possible, from the panel, and the question is to every one of them, if you may.
okay.
Thank you.
So, who would like to start?
I had it go earlier, so.
I think if, the issue is to ask the question, who's the client here? Who's the customer? Is it the child going to school or his dad or his mom being the boss of the house? So I think that's a very important area to define with. And schools are very peculiar because you have captive. If the child or the student is the client, then he is a captive customer. Therefore, his experience has to be taken in a much broader way. And this is one of the issues to resolve in academic institutions.
Yeah, I suppose there's a couple of things, and it's hard to speak on specific because to your very good point, the customer is the child with a future, the parent who wants to have the best upbringing for the child or the society, and indeed the academic stage. So you have to look at the whole ecosystem, and maybe I'll look at ecosystem since it's one of my favorite, although it's kind of a bit of again a cliched word and overused so much. If I look at a natural ecosystem and biomimicry and so on, looks at these kinds of things, if you haven't got a sustainable model, there's not a graceful end. You die. You might die slowly, but you die. And so I don't want to be melodramatic, but you have to kind of look at those things. Customer experience, first of all, really understand it. Secondly, recognize it's dynamic. And then thirdly, deliver on it every day and work out how your organization on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, etc., is going to deliver on it. And that requires evolution and development and so on. And that doesn't necessarily mean a high-end customer experience. I had the privilege of flying here on Etihad, absolutely superb experience. But I also have used recently some low-cost airlines into Europe from the UK. It wasn't one sense as nice as the experience but you knew what you were getting with the customer promise against the price you're paying for was very clear. So for me, they made me a promise. They were going to get me from London to Frankfurt, at a time at a certain price. They delivered on that promise. There's no frills by definition, but they kept their promise. If they deliver that to me every time, then for me, they have a sustainable business model, assuming, of course, their numbers mean that the fare I paid them allows them to invest in planes, infrastructure, and their people.
Thank you. I'd like to move along since I noticed that there are a number of questions in the audience. I'd like to make sure we get to everyone in the remaining time. So put your hands back up, those who had a question, and we'll get a microphone to you. I think there's one coming this way. And then we'll do the gentleman behind.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ivan, working for Lenovo, Golf. Dr. Saad, you mentioned earlier that 95% of CIOs do not understand the job, hiding behind complex, intimidating technology terms, right? Which is actually stretching a misalignment between business requirements and technology capabilities. How can we fix that? I think one solution was put forward by Phil, mentioning the entrepreneurial CIO. So should we put going forward as a governance guideline that we shouldn't have CIOs being in position for 40 years, but should they be moving cross between responsibilities to get a feel of the business? And since we're here on the BCS event, should we relook into how we educate our kids, how are we building up our new generations? Because if you go into a business school, 99% of your curricula will be business-related, HR, marketing, sales, and 1% IT. If you go into a law school, the same. If you go into an IT school, it's going to be the opposite. It's going to be 99% IT and few about the rest. So should we actually rethink the way education is conveyed to new generations?
I'd like to, there's a two-part question there, and I think I'd like to maybe ask Phil if you could start, Phil, the first part, and we'll have Saad address the second.
For me, I guess it covers both areas, both school, education establishments in particular, and at work. I think the IT industry has done itself a tremendous disservice by allowing technology, phrases, words, some of the stuff you saw on the PowerPoints this morning, to be our natural barrier, our natural home, to say, well, look, I am the technology expert, this is kind of a black box, you can't get in here. If you're a genius like me, it'd be okay, but you're out there. I'll interpret your need and then give you back the answer. The reality is, of course, is when the IT team sort of return a year later to the business with the answer, all bright and shiny, their business have kind of moved on or even forgotten what the question was, because actually technology and business have really been divorced, and organizations have often perpetuated that, suppliers have added to that, and I think that's one of our bigger challenges. Many CEOs after the year 2000, remember that enormous spend on IT for the millennium bug, remember that, which turned out to be 90% a lie, of course, by the IT industry, as you well know by now, was actually that they began very frustrated by pouring a lot of money into it and actually not seeing much return. I think businesses need to have IT sort of technology people in there who are signposting the answer, who are in the business with an IT sort of bias, or in the business with a HR bias, or in the business with a finance bias, or in the business with a whatever bias. But that's just a bias. I believe I could have been very good at organizing, toilet cleaning. I just happen to have chosen technology. I'm just a good organizer, if that makes sense. And it's the same for education. I do a lot of talks in universities in particular, in the UK and Europe, and my biggest, I guess, most depressing thing I get back is they think they're coming to learn from a bloke who's going to teach them how to compute, to write languages. All I turn up and talk about is the application of IT. And so the whole mood in the room changes. And I think the application of it to whatever part of the business is the thing that the IT teams need to relearn and stop all the jargon. I liked your point earlier. Cloud computing, I started with cloud computing in 1980. We called it a giant data center. It's just moved on a bit in terms of a description, location, pricing, and measurement, but it is still a giant piece of storage in a different site availability form, and yet it's a whole new technology. My new CEO, when I got to Aviva, said to me, Phil, we've got to go completely cloud. And I said, why would that be? He said, that's what I've heard everybody's doing. We've got to do the same. When your CEO is giving you back technology phrases, you have just lost the battle to be an effective CIO for that business if you're not careful.
Okay, Sad, could you maybe speak to the second part about should we change the way we're educating our young people today?
Yeah, you'll find my words very strange, but I don't believe in the schooling system altogether. This is too structured.